So we've just gone over where clay comes from. Basically, if we want to take a quick review on the chalkboard here, the the whiteboard, um, clay, primary clay, used to be feldspar. And the feldspar was one of the four crystals that makes up granite. And granite is magma that cooled very slowly underneath the surface of the Earth's crust. And when primary clay gets ground up by a glacier, a river, or wind, we call that then secondary clay. And because in England, they harvested the clay by rolling it, starting like you make a snowman, you start with a small ball, and you make it bigger and bigger, and you actually harvest the clay into large balls, and then you put it onto your ox cart, and you take your ox cart back to your studio. Because it's harvested in balls, we call it ball clay. But ball clay is really secondary clay. And in this country, we get it mostly from Tennessee and Kentucky because rivers have mostly ground it up and they make it red. So that's why we want you to buy red stoneware. Okay, so now what we kind of want to go over, since we've taken a look at how porcelain is different from stoneware. Stoneware has grog, porcelain has none. And we took a little look on the board here about how primary clay is and how it's different from secondary clay. We've taken a look at that in the prior talk. So now what we want to go over is, why does clay crack? So on my table here, so if you want to pan down here on the table, you'll see a bunch. This is my gallery of horrors. This isn't even all of them, but it shows you basic problems. So this is number 8. This happens to be number 8, where the person put the walls around the foundation instead of on top of the base. So it cracked. This is a typical one where the person made the foot ring, that's this part right here, too small for how wide the rim is. And during the firing, just like a hen sits down on eggs, the whole pot, the pressure from the walls came down, and it looks as though the center has risen up, but really the walls just came down around it. Same with this one. If can you see this one? This one on the table, if I hold it like this, do you see how it's cockeyed?
Got it now.
Is that good? So you can see how the whole piece just slumped. So I have a little saying that clay becomes just as soft during the high fire as when you formed it. So if you don't get the support in the right place during the firing, the clay actually melts. And if you don't have the foot supporting the walls in the proper place, then you'll get all of these various problems. So we're going to look at basically the word uneven. We're going to try to figure out why clay cracks. It has to do with uneven. Could be water, could be drying, could be thickness. Okay, so pressure. So those are the things we're going to look at. So we have a handout, and the title is What Makes Clay Crack? It looks like this. And the first thing I want to go over is uneven thickness. Now I have a little piece to kind of show a little visual right here. I used to have this student who liked to roll out really thin clay, like one corn tortilla thick, like super thin porcelain. And she liked to take solid balls of clay, like little ping pong balls, because she liked ball feet. They're in the wrong place. But also, if we turn it over and look at it, we'll actually see there's places where each foot is, the clay sat down around each foot, and there's actually little cracks. And also, somewhere on the rim, there's a little crack right there where my finger is. Can you see it? So, and if you turn it over, and by the way, there's another crack right here on the rim. So all the stress goes to the rim. So if we turn that over, we'll see that right where that crack was, there was one of the balls was right there where that crack was. So just like a hen sits down on her eggs, the clay sits down around wherever the support is. About this lady. So she liked to make really thin slabs, solid ball feet. And what you want to think about is that when we add water to clay, when you buy your clay, it's cheese hard stage, like cream cheese. It's hydrated and it's expanded. So what happens is when clay dries, it shrinks. So that's why we'd like to have all of our walls the same thickness everywhere, so they all shrink together. So the problem with this woman, when she made her projects, when we would go to pick them up to put them into the kiln to bisque fire them, we would pick them up properly with two hands underneath, and we would find that we were holding her tortilla, but all the three balls were still sitting on the cart because they had separated when they dried. She also did another thing where she liked to use really watery slip. She went to the people working on the wheels and got their very watery slip and used that as the glue. But we're going to learn in this class we want to use slip, which is just clay plus water. So it's like sticky, like peanut butter, because it works as a better glue. It keeps it all together. So I have a little drawing here, and it's just showing the thin walled plate here, the solid balls, and I just said that slip equals clay plus water. So when you're going to use a structural slip to join, you want clay, but just a little bit of water, because the more water you add, the more it has to shrink. So if you just add a little bit of water to the clay and make it like a paste, like peanut butter, then it doesn't have to shrink so much. No, the reason the balls separated is because the thin tortilla slab shrunk first. And the balls, maybe tomorrow, they'd shrink tomorrow. So they just cracked. Yeah, it came apart. So when you use just a little bit of water, then you mix it to a peanut butter consistency. Okay. Now, we also have cosmetic slips. Like if we wanted to make something blue, you could paint liquid blue clay. We call that slip too, but that's a cosmetic slip, and that's paintable. It's kind of like kefir. So those ones, it's clay plus a whole bunch of water, and then we take all the grog out and we add a colorant. That's you paint on. We don't use that when we're going to join two pieces of clay together, like a foot to a piece, okay? So the question is, how could somebody, if they wanted to have their piece look like this, look as if it had solid feet, how could you still get that look? Nice try. Like poke a bunch of holes in it, like? Okay, so she was thinking, how could we just put a toothpick through? Well, that wouldn't work because still, it would still shrink later. So the toothpick wouldn't help all the way. That was a good try, though. So the basic answer is you could hollow out. So if you hollowed out the ball, if you chopped it in half and scooped it out and then put it back together, and then when you put it in, then you would use a toothpick and poke a hole inside this. It's kind of like a balloon, but you poke a little hole in it. That way it won't blow up. Because if it's totally hollow and completely with no little air hole in it, yeah, those blow up. Because the water inside the clay, when we heat it up, it expands and it just breaks it. But so what I tried to draw here was what I drew here was the tortilla. And then I'm showing that the thickness of the three balls equals the thickness of the tortilla. And then, of course, here we would have used a fork, a regular kitchen fork, to score where these two go together. We would have put just one drop of water on the ball and a drop of water on the tortilla. And then we would have put a little bit of that peanut butter and squished them together so that they interlock. So you can still have that look. So I'm bringing this up as a sample to show you about thickness. So what I'd like you to write down on your handout here is this. When you leave one area thicker than an adjacent area, so I'm right here on the board. So when you leave one area thicker than an adjacent, that's ADJACENT, area. Then you put a little equal sign, write unequal thickness. You have unequal thickness. And I have a little piece here to show you what I'm talking about. I just rolled it out, and I took one of my tools in my kit, and I went down a little bit, and then I went a little farther, a little farther, a little deeper, a little deeper. Well, I went so deep here that the piece actually cracked. So that's what I mean by adjacent. When you have one area thicker than an adjacent area. So thicker, thinner, thicker, thinner, thicker, thinner. So usually it has to do when you press like leaves in. Here's another sample here. I'm looking for the how deep this is. So you can see parts of it are thinner here, and other parts of it goes really deep. And if I turn it over, you'll see that it's cracked right where it was too thin. This one actually has two problems. It's got a problem with how deep the leaf was pressed into the clay, but it also has to do with where the feet were placed too. Okay, so let's go back to what you're writing on your sheet now. So your sheet says when you leave one area thicker than an adjacent area, you have unequal thickness. Then write the number 2, put a colon, and then a 1. 2 to 1 is bad. So if something is twice as thick as something else, it's going to crack. And then write, and the thinner part dries first. And the thing you got to remember about clay is when it's hydrated, it's in an expanded state. It's big. And when it loses its water, it's going to shrink. So the thinner part dries first and shrinks first, and you get a crack. So we can see on this, we can go back to this leaf again. We can see that there's parts of this leaf where it really wasn't very, the leaf didn't go in very deep at all. So a quarter is okay, a third is okay, but a halfway down, actually parts of this, they actually pierced the leaf. They actually went all the way through the leaf when they put their texture in there, the leaf texture. So you can't go more than halfway and expect it to not crack. Now on this piece here, this piece used to be stuck together. These used to be stuck together, but they started cracking, kind of where there's a little V there, where the they started cracking apart here. And if you look at it, if you look to see like how deep, let me give it to her. And oh, sorry, that one. So if you look at it, you can kind of see it doesn't really look like the texture of the veins went in that deep. But what do you get when you add 1/4 plus 1/4? You get a half. So a half is 2 to 1. So that's why this piece cracked, because this person took two exact same leaves. They took a sheet of clay, a slab of clay, and they pressed both leaves on at the same time. And the big part of the vein, the really wide part of the vein, matched up. So 1/4 plus 1/4 equals a half, so it cracked. Plus, this also has the letter V. We're going to talk about the letter V, too. It has a V angle where the person cut the pot. And so V's also cause cracks, too. The person cut out a little V right here. See how that makes a letter V? Yeah, you can't do V's. So this guy here, this was just a nice flat slab where the person put the leaf down on one side. And, you know, they've got some V's, and we'll see the V cracks there too. There's another V crack over here. Well, if I turn, oh, you can see it much better on the back side. And this one as well, you can see the little crack right there. It's a V. They cut out a V, okay? You just can't do that. I'll explain that one later. So, but if you take a good look at one of these ones, it shows better than this one. So what I'm talking about is if we have this relative thickness, If you go halfway down, you're asking for it. It's going to start cracking because the thinner part shrinks first as the clay's drying. So what would be a way that you could still get the look of the width of that vein, but don't press it halfway in? How could you do it? Just don't press it so far. Just press it enough. Over here on the chalkboard here. I mean on the whiteboard. So I want you to just draw two lines, kind of like railroad tracks, and just put the word wall. So again, I'm not saying that's how thick your wall is. I'm just saying it's just a picture. Figure out where a quarter of the way down into the wall. If you press something in, that's about a quarter of the way, because half is in the middle. So draw what you think a quarter of the way down is, and put 1/4, put a little arrow, and then put underneath it, put OK 1/4. Because a quarter is okay. You can go a quarter of the way. That's no problem. You could go a third. So this time draw, so you have 1/3 and 2/3 nothing. And put an arrow and put 1/3, okay. 1/3's okay. But then I want you to draw a big slash. And whenever you see a little squiggly line like this, kind of looks like an old-fashioned radiator, that's a Bourbaki curve. That means danger. Ah, that's a science person's way of saying, hey, watch out, Bourbaki. And put 1/2, so draw it right in the middle, and put no. 2 to 1, you can't do it. And so I also drew it this way to show, like, if you made a big dent in your piece somehow, that kind of represents that leaf. So if you really press something, if you pinched it too hard, if when you're rolling it out, you had a little crease in your cloth and your cloth made a dent in your slab, that could cause it to crack. Or if you trimmed it funny. So I have another one here. This is another really great sample. So we understood on this leaf, right? We could see, because some parts of this leaf, it's okay, but some parts of it, no. Could you see how what's wrong? Why did this plate crack? So there's a big old crack here. If you look at it, you can kind of feel it, and you can actually, if you turn it around enough, you can kind of see that it's real thin right there. But if you flip it over, oh, look how thick that is. Can you see how thick that is? That's like about 4 times or 5 times as thick as the thinnest part. Were you able to see how thin the thinnest part was? So see, that's what I mean by adjacent, thick, thin, thick, thin. So here they have thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, thick. Right? Like this thing I was trying to show you before, like this little guy here. So you can't go adjacent, not like a wedge of cheese or a doorstop that slowly, gradually goes from thin to thick. I'm not talking about that. Those warp, but I'm saying, why does clay crack? So it's when you have it, something thick next to something thin, because the thin part is going to shrink first. And it just rips itself away from the thick part. Okay, so this was a piece someone threw on the wheel. And this is called, well, you could do this when you throw it. You actually use your fingers, so the person pressed too hard. You have a nice, I love the rim, a nice wide rim. Sorry, a nice thick rim. I like that. But they pressed down too far. How could you fix that one? Like if you figured it out, like if you took your needle tool before you cut it off the bat, and you kind of notice like, ooh, it's really thin there. What could you do to fix it before you took it off the wheel?
Can you put another piece of
clay? You take some clay and you roll a coil. Or you like take a ball and you stick your finger in the ball and make like you squeeze it into a donut, like a really big donut, like a big rubber band kind of thing. And then if you just laid that in there and pressed it in there and smushed it in there while it's going around, you could fix it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now I have another one here. So is that pretty clear on this one? Okay. Now this one here, okay, this one, let me show you this one first. So this one shows that the floor, so the floor is this part right here, is twice as thick as the wall. So now I'm going to show you what it should have looked like. So on this one, I've got all these zebra stripes on it, and I've got all the parts of the pot. I've written floor, and foot thickness, the width of the foot. The base is this part of the pot here. It's the wall that's just above the floor. Here's the wall itself, that's the thinnest part. And then here's the rim. So do you see why this one cracked?
So all the parts that have been marked with the lines should not be there.
Right, that's what you trim away. It's a good habit. When you open, you don't go down too far, so you have a lot that you can trim away. So they didn't throw it wrong, they just never trimmed it. You just turn it upside down when it's leather hard, and you use a trim tool that comes in your kit, and you just carve it away. Like this one, this person did trim a foot. So this one has a foot that's been trimmed. Unfortunately, they put the foot in the wrong place, so that's why it's slumped. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you, the reason this pot cracked here is because they didn't trim it, and this is twice as thick as the wall. That's that 2-to-1 bad ratio. It is too much for it. So who shrunk first when this thing dried? When we bisqued it and when we high fired it? What shrunk the wall? Right. And the floor shrunk later, so it cracked. Okay. So what could they have done so it wouldn't crack?
They could have just not pressed a lot on the
Yeah.
bottom of the lid because
And then on this one, oh, I'm sorry. So and then on this one, all they would have to have done was they just don't press down so far. If they checked it before they cut it off the piece, they could have added the part where it was too thin. And then same with this one here. All they had to have done was just not press it so far. Well, I was telling you the story about the person with the tortilla slab and the solid feet. Just hollow it out.
hollow it out.
Yeah. But we're going to find out that that's not a good solution. Because clay becomes just as soft during the high fires when you made it. During the high fire, it melts. So yeah, the balls are no good. Yeah, we'll find out.
Balls are no good.
They're no good. Not in high fire land. Not in cone 10 land. Okay. So now,
What if you air dry it?
oh, you can buy air drying clay. It's just you can't glaze it, you can't fire it, you can't cook in it, you can't eat from it. It's for looking at. You can have it for looking at. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, number 2, uneven water. Okay. So I have to dig something out of my cabinet here to show it to you. But before I do, let me just kind of go over this. So do you have your little sideways sheet? So we have what I call the sideways sheet. It's this one right here. And one side just talks about the stages the clay goes through, but this one talks about what do you do when. So it's talking about when the clay is cheese hard. That means right out of the bag. That's when you make adjustments, addition, or join parts. You score with a fork, a regular dinner fork. You moisten with a drop of water. You score both parts that you want to join, a drop of water on both parts that you scored. And then you're going to add peanut butter consistency slip. You're going to wrap it in a plastic bag. I like to save bags from the grocery store. You know, when you buy vegetables, those real thin bags. Yeah. So we wrap it, make it airtight for 2 days. What happens is the water from the slip and where you put that drop of water, that goes into and distributes throughout the whole pot. Because right where you added it, it's like super wet there and it has to shrink a lot. So by wrapping it in a bag, we say it equilibrates. So the water distributes evenly. Then when we take it out of the bag, it's all the same moisture content and it can shrink evenly. But if you score, add water, put the slip, and don't wrap it, you run the risk of having it detach there because it has to shrink more there because there's more water there than the rest of the piece. So when you're taking a look, this sheet is really good because it's basically telling you the stages and how to properly attach things. It also mentions paint on slip now. That's the cosmetic slip if we want something yellow or something blue. So I have a sample here of a piece that was actually made with white stoneware. And the person, thank you. And the person painted white, it was white clay. The person painted blue slip over the whole piece, the inside and the outside, painted, so the whole thing looks blue. And then they waited a day or so, and they carved through the blue slip so that the white clay would show through. We call that sgraffito. So it's real subtle, and that's fine, but that sheet tells you when you want to paint the slip on, because all slip is cosmetic slip. It's just clay that we added a lot of water to. We took all of the grog out. Grog is the sand in the clay. And then we added colorant to it. So because it's extra wet, it's going to shrink more than regular clay would. And then if you grab that sheet again, the sideways sheet, I think we found last week when we took a look at this that the first time clay shrinks is from cheese hard to leather hard. So clay shrinks first halfway from cheese hard to leather hard. So it's better to paint the slip on, this extra wet, expanded clay, when you first make your piece, when it's cheese hard, so that they shrink together. Because if you wait till the second stage, which is leather hard, which takes maybe 60 to 90 minutes from when you make a piece, it dries that quickly, the clay will do its first shrinking.
So you're saying you should put that slip on in the first 60 to 90 minutes that you create the shape?
Bingo. Okay, so I had this student, she made something kind of like this one, and she made it one day, and then she came back next week, and by the time she came back next week, the piece was totally bone dry. That's the next stage on your sideways sheet. It's cheese hard, leather hard, bone dry. That's all stages of greenware before we fire it. This happens to be a little piece of, this is bone dry greenware. And if I can stick my fingernail in it, if I try hard enough, I can snap little pieces of it off, okay? It's kind of like a cookie. It's like a, can't do that too much, I won't have any. So, so this is bone dry greenware. So you could put slip on this, you could, but probably it's just gonna fall off, okay? Because this is already shrunk, it's all dry, it's all shrunk. So why am I telling you this? Well, because this woman decided after she made her project, it was kind of big like this, she decided she wanted just the bottom of it to be blue. So she didn't tell me, she just went over and got some blue slip, and she took the bone dry project, painted blue slip all over it. Okay, what slip? Clay plus a lot of water minus the grog plus some colorant to make it blue. Painted a whole bunch of it on there. She was able to paint it on, yeah. What happened was the bone dry clay accepted the water out of the slip, and what did it do? Expanded, okay, but she only painted the bottom like a circle of blue on the bottom, but she didn't do the sides. So what were the sides busy doing? Nothing, they're just kind of sitting there, right? But the bottom where she painted the slip, that expanded. But then it eventually had to dry. So when it dried, it cracked. When it shrank, just right around the edge of where the blue met where she didn't paint anything. So the next time, the week after she came back, she said, "Hey, look what happened." She had like a blue tortilla and this wall. If you wanna try to have the best result possible, especially for dinnerware, where you don't want to have the slip delaminate from the surface, you're better off putting it on cheese hard. And you might have to wait a half an hour and paint a second coat, and then wait another half hour and paint a third coat. And just like you're doing house painting, you want to paint the first coat like vertical, and then wait till it's not all sticky. And then you could paint a second, when it gets a little skin on it, you could paint a second coat that goes like horizontal, and then you wait another half hour. And then you could paint a third coat that goes on kind of diagonal. Because if you look very carefully at this piece right here, if you zoom in on it, I think you can see, you can actually see the brush brush strokes. Because they really didn't really get it a really good coverage. Which maybe you like that brush stroke look. I'm not saying it's bad or good. It's what you prefer. So had the person done going the other direction, they could have gotten a solid coat. That makes sense. So that sheet is really good because it tells you when to do what. Okay. Okay, so number 2 was uneven water. So what we learned was if you use really watery slip, it causes the woman who used the balls with the thin slab and the solid clay, she actually used really watery slip to put them together. So she caused her piece to come apart. And the second woman took a project that was bone dry, added slip to it, so she destroyed her piece because it came apart. Now, one day I was working on the wheel, and I wanted to make rings of Saturn casserole. So I made the bowl, and I made kind of a flange that stuck out like this, because I wanted to put pink slip and yellow and blue and green, right, purple, to like the rings of Saturn. And then I was going to have a lid. Well, when you work on the wheel, you're adding water. What does that cause the clay to do? Expand. Plus, it's like wet. It's kind of like Greek yogurt. It's not very strong as when it's drier. So I wasn't thinking, or maybe I was just experimenting, I don't know. So I painted a whole bunch of slip on the same day I made it. That's no longer cheese hard. We don't even have a term for that. It's kind of like Greek yogurt, it's Jell-O. It's just really wet, like brie cheese, camembert. It's like that. So the problem is, because I had made this kind of ledge at a 90-degree angle out, because I added the slips to this flat surface, I put it in the cabinet so it dries slowly. It couldn't hold it up. And when I came in the next day, what did I find? The whole ring fell down, ripped itself off my bowl. All I had was a jaggedy-looking bowl, and I didn't have my rings of Saturn anymore. They were laying down on the bat. So if you want to do that, you would throw something one day, put it in a cabinet, wait till the next day so it goes back to cheese hard. So it's the story of the 3 bears, right? If you wait too late, doesn't work. If you do it too early, doesn't work. It's got to be just right. So just right is cheese hard. Yeah, okay. And I have one more one I want to show you. Okay, so we're still back on uneven water. So this was a person who wanted to make a vase. It's 2 slabs and a slab between with a foot and a top, the neck and a rim. And the person put these things inside. He called them struts. He wanted a perfect vase, but he waited too late to put it together and it fell apart. Yeah. So these things that are inside, they were supposed to keep the 2 sides just the right distance so it was kind of nice and puffy. But unfortunately, he didn't use his fork to score, and he didn't use peanut butter slip, and he waited too late. So not cheese hard, kind of leather hard on its way to bone dry is when he decided to put it all together. And because he didn't use the fork, it was almost like using like a toothbrush to try to rough it up. So if you kind of take your 2 hands and spread your fingers apart and then make your fingers interlace like this, that's what we're trying to do with this piece of clay and this piece of clay. We're trying to get them to go together like that when we press the clay together. So if you look at this really closely, so by using the point of his nail tool very lightly, it wasn't deep enough. So the score marks weren't deep enough to begin with. He waited too late to put them together. He kind of went to somebody on the wheel that had very watery slip and used that as the glue. So the clay had already contracted. He put a whole bunch of really wet watery slip. So that caused that little bit of clay right where they touched to expand a lot. So they had to contract a lot. And so when it became totally bone dry after he put it together the next week, you could see a little hairline crack going around both of the faces. Problem with this one, waited too long. So the person really wanted to fire it. The person said, "Oh, hey, let me put some more slip on it. I'll fix it." And I'm just thinking, no, it's not going to fix. But I let the person go ahead, but I didn't want his work to destroy anybody else's work. One student made the bowl, and another person made a mushroom. And the person who made the mushroom didn't make a very good support to hold their mushroom up. If you take a good look at it, you can see where the tip of the mushroom here just broke. It snapped off. That wasn't done when the person made it. That happened during the firing. That pot to not do that to someone else's work. Yeah. So, I kind of had a feeling that maybe both of these were going to come apart. So what I did was I made a little jail for this. When I put it in the kiln, I put one kiln post here, another one here, another one, two more on this side. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So what I did was when I fired it, I made a little jail. Taller than this, and some on the other side. And then I put a kiln shelf, and then I put a real heavy bowl on top, like a tiger cage. And sure enough, to protect the pieces around it so that they wouldn't be stuck to it. And so sure enough, this part decoupled, and I kind of wish somebody wouldn't have helped me, because this used to have, there was like a kiln post that used to be stuck to the kiln post. Anyway, it's more dramatic that way. I protected the other pieces around it by doing this. Yeah. So moral of the story is, story of the three bears. Put things together when they're cheese hard. Use a fork, peanut butter slip, dry it in a bag. Well, 2 days, put it in a bag, and then wrap it. For unequal water is that whenever you want to join two pieces of clay together, the structural slip, we want it the consistency of peanut butter, not yogurt. Yogurt is too much water. That would induce cracking. Number 3, leaving clay over support too long. So if we look in the classroom, I have a few pieces like that. So I have one of them right here. So on top of the cabinet here, I'm tapping this thing. This is a tube. This came from probably a place like Home Depot. It's just a plastic tube. And can you see there's a little piece of plastic bag right there? So they did the right thing. This is what we call a convex support. So concave, think of a cave as like your hand cupped, but if you turn your hand over, it's convex. So this is a convex form. And the person put the clay around the outside of the form. This is called a release, the plastic sheet. A release could be a plastic bag. It could be a piece of newspaper. It could be a piece of cloth. Just something that will stick to the clay and not because otherwise the clay sticks to the form. So remember, when clay dries, it shrinks. So I leave this in the classroom to show you just how much the clay shrinks. That's kind of a lot, right? That's kind of a big, wide crack. So I just leave it up here to remind people, get it off the release before it shrinks. So if we go back to our sideways sheet again, it talks about when does clay shrink? It shrinks from cheese hard stage to leather hard stage. Leather hard is something like leather. You can bend it. It's like stale tortillas. You can bend it. You just can't wad it back up into a ball. So I have this one to show you. So there's 2 of them here. They're kind of twins. The person took a brick. The person did the right thing by putting a plastic bag around the hard brick. The person put the wet clay all around. Put the brick inside. Here they put the clay over the brick. But again, they left it too long. So in this case, the person did use a sheet of newspaper as the release, which is the right thing to do. It's just they left it on too long. So that's a black plastic tube, like you'd get at Home Depot. And then they wrapped it with a newspaper. Now look, some people like to permanently wrap one sheet of newspaper around the tube and use it over and over again. If you decide to use a little masking tape to attach the newspaper to the tube so it doesn't wrinkle, then you need a second sheet of newspaper on top of the first one that will stick to your slab of clay. And then you can pull your whole slab of clay and the piece of newspaper that's stuck to the clay off the tube that has the other sheet of newspaper taped to the tube. So if you ever decide to tape your release to your support, you must have a second release that will stick to the clay, so the clay comes off the release. So I had a gentleman take this class, and he made this wood sculpture, wood mask sculpture. This is wood, dry wood. He sculpted the mask. He brought it in. He didn't use a release. He didn't know. He put the clay, the wet clay slab, right on the dry wood. What happened? It stuck to it. Yeah, it stuck quite well. What happened to the water that was in the clay? The wood is accepting the water from the clay. The wood's going to expand. So the wood's busy getting bigger. The clay is trying to get smaller, but the clay is stuck to the wood, so guess what? It's going to crack. And plus you left it on too long. I used to...
Yeah, good. Okay.
And the person even riveted it. The person even had taken some clay, pushed it through the mouth to make sure it'd be stuck really, really well. So, what's the moral of the story? Use a release, like those thin plastic bags when you go grocery shopping, you buy your vegetables. Those are perfect because they're real thin. Dry cleaner bags are good too. And when you put it on a convex surface, always what? Always take it off before leather hard. How much time? 60 to 90 minutes. Get it off. So what's going to happen is the air will be drying this surface of the clay because it's in the air. The other surface of the clay has plastic on it. It's not drying. So it's nice if you can ever have two supports. And then you put another one over here. It could be a cardboard box with a bunch of foam in it or a bunch of towels or rags. And then you just flip it over so that the face is now in the box. And then you take the support off because you have your release. And then you peel the release off. Now the air can get to that side that couldn't dry. So they can equilibrate a little. And they want them to dry in the concave side. Okay? So now, do you like to bake at all?
Yes.
Okay. Do you like doing pies or bread?
I've done cakes, pies.
Okay, so you could bring in a metal pan,
Okay.
2 of them.
Okay.
And if you can, when you go shopping, try to buy one pan that's slightly smaller. You're going to work on the back side of the smaller one, the wrong side. And then you'll get a bigger pan, and you'll flip it over. And I have some samples to show you. I'll show you that. So if you have a bread pan, if you could, find one that's slightly smaller or slightly bigger than this. And this is the convex side. You want to put your plastic bag here and put your clay around it, and then wait a little while. And then sign your name, put the class you're in, the month and the year. After about 90 minutes, 60 minutes, you put the other plastic bag here. You take your second one that's slightly bigger, put it over here and turn it. And then you take this one out. The reason why would I want you to work on the back side? It's because this is nice and smooth. And if I start with a piece of clay, a slab of clay that is flat, it's just a flat slab. If I start with a flat slab and I put it on the inside, as I start to push it in, I'm going to start making like wrinkles, and I'm going to get like dents where my fingers go. So it turns out, and that'll show up on your inside, and that's hard to clean because it's like all bumpy. So if you use the back side, put your plastic. one layer is better than two. This is two. And then you put your clay slab, pretend this is your clay slab. You put this here. And sometimes you actually have to cut out a little, like, triangle to get it to fit better. Sometimes if your slab is thick enough, about 3/8 of an inch thick, then, like a centimeter about, then you can sometimes just kind of press with two hands like this. You kind of just press it together, and you get the clay particles, which are like plates, to get them to just slide like that, and it won't do any of this wrinkly, ruffling business. So the reason why I'm telling you to do it on the back side is so that when you finally get your finished product, you take it out, you'll have a nice smooth interior that's easy to clean. All right, so that's with the bread pan. So just try to get two that are one slightly bigger, one slightly smaller. You can use two the same. It's possible. Okay. So let's say you found some things like this. So every time I go to a place like, Big Lots or something like that, I always buy two. So here happens to be a fish. And if you feel it, you'll feel that this has the scales are on the back side, and that's perfect for us because we want to use this side to start with and get the texture imprinted in our slab. So we're gonna slip it into a bag. And then we're gonna put our clay over the release. And we're going to let it rest for about an hour. We're going to put our name on the back side, our class, the month, and the year. You got to have a second release. Otherwise, the clay is going to stick to that one. So you take your second release, put it on top of the clay. Then put your second support on the concave part. And then when you flip it, what you do is you take the support out first. Now the plastic is going to be stuck to your clay. So then you have to carefully peel it off. Now your project can rest in the concave part with the release, and it can dry that way, protected. Usually we let them dry kind of like a week. They might dry as much as 2 or 3 days, but a week is pretty good. So 2 releases, 2 exactly the same supports. So I happen to have these that are fish. I also have these that are parrots. 2 more, they're just metal, like candy dishes. You can find these in thrift stores. But the point is, because it has this nice texture, you press it down there first and use a plastic release. Okay. So unfortunately, this one's been handled a little too much. This student took a candy dish, a regular glass crystal cut candy dish, and used a release, good. Used the concave side, good, but the clay inside should have been okay. Why did it crack? It's totally, it's not too thin, no. So look at how they did it. Do you see how they brought the clay over the outside?
They should have just cut it.
Should have cut it? Or if you've ever made a pie crust where you tuck it in, you cut a little, and then you put the extra, like you're tucking your shirt in, you want to tuck it under so it's inside.
Okay.
Because it was outside of the form, clay has to shrink. And it couldn't shrink because it was hanging on the outside. Okay? Yeah, it's too bad they ripped all these pieces off because this used to be, like stuck on here, and you could see it a little bit better. But so for this one, the moral to this story is because of shrinkage, you want to use a release. The release could be leaves. So there's places where I left you some spots on there to write. So it says shrinkage, use a release. So it could be plastic bag, dried leaves, fresh leaves, newspaper, cloth, like a man's handkerchief. It's like a real thin cloth that doesn't wrinkle. Because when you have the wrinkles, it makes creases, and the creases makes the slab thinner, and then that could induce cracking. For the moral of that story, it is use a release and take it off the support before it's leather hard. Feels when it starts to feel dry, when you touch it, and it feels kind of dry, not sticky. Because when the clay's fresh, it's sticky. The next one is the S-crack. So all you have to do in your notes for today is just write down number 4, wheel S-crack. Compressed floor from edge towards center, no ponds. So when you're throwing on the wheel, if you're not careful, if you don't do a step called compress the floor, which means while the wheel is spinning around, you push your fingers from the outside edge towards the center. And you take your, like a record player, you take your fingers off, you go back to the edge, and you slowly move your hands right to the middle and take them off. You do that a few times. And the first couple times you're doing with fingers perpendicular. Then you go at a slight angle, like number 3. The third time you do it at a slight, like about a 30-degree angle. And what you want to see is you want to see the center kind of pop up, kind of raise up a little bit. And that tells you have compressed it so much the clay can only go up. And you won't get this S-shaped crack. So do you see how the crack looks like an S? And I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to cover up the person's name. So you can see that the crack goes all the way through. And it looks like an S. So that's what we call the S-crack. But there's 2 ways to get this. It's either you didn't compress the floor, you pressing down with your fingers, or you left a pond inside the whole time you threw. And what was happening to the water? The floor was taking up more water than the walls did. Walls dry first, floor dries last, you get an S-crack. So there's 2 ways of getting it. No ponds. Don't leave ponds. That's the fix. And make sure you see the center pop up when you... Yeah.
You take the water out with a sponge.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Don't let it accumulate in the bottom. Now, this one, here's a test. This is porcelain. How did it get red, and when did it get red, and what is the red? This is bone dry greenware. See, it sounds like wood. Slip. Yeah, good. The person painted slip on. Ooh, now I also I learned something once. I had trimmed a piece, and I had waited till after I trimmed. We always trim when the piece is leather hard. And I waited till after I trimmed when it was leather hard, and I painted a bunch of slip-on, and my piece cracked. Maybe that's the 3rd way you can get an S-crack. I don't know. Okay, number 5. The sun. Why would the sun... What's uneven about the sun? If you were to make something and you go outside and you put it in the sun so the sun can help dry it, what would be uneven about that?
It rotates.
Well, if you think about it.
Uneven. Uneven.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, like the rays of the sun, you know, like if you're the sun, and you kind of hit this side more than that side, and you hit this side more than this side, and you hit these 2 more than you do over there. So that's uneven. So these would shrink first, right? So that's another good way to crack something, is to go put it in the sun. So you said rotate. That was good. So in the olden days, like when they first came out with microwave ovens, they used to have this thing, Nordic where you wound it up. It was a ratchet. It was a turntable. And real slow, it goes like this. And you put your food in the microwave, and it just spins it around until it runs out. So if you still have one of those, you could go put that in out there. Because just like when you stand in front of a bonfire, you know how you just kind of spin around? So if you look at the clock every 5 minutes, if you go there and just give it a little turn, like as if it's like 12 o'clock, and then you're going to make it go to 11 o'clock, right? And then you're going to make it go to 10 o'clock. So in 1 hour, you go out there 12 times. Every 5 minutes, you turn it so.
Okay.
Yeah, you could, but not a good idea.
Okay.
Number 6. Okay, now we get to the letter V. So now we're going to talk about this piece right here. Okay, this piece used to be stuck together, and I had it stuck with masking tape. There's just a nice flat slab. And they probably put it in something like this bowl here, just to get it kind of not flat. But what happened was, if you turn it over, and if you look at it very carefully, so it used to be stuck together here, but it used to have a little hairline crack right here. If you look at it from the end, you can see right here, this makes the letter V. Now here's a U over here and here's a U over here, but right here, do you see how that's a V right there? And it made a little hairline crack. It's kind of like you score a piece of paper before you rip it apart, or you score glass. So, the letter V. What's going on with the letter V? I have another one here. This one. This leaf used to be just a flat leaf. And if you look carefully on this one, you'll see a crack right here, right there. It's about 1 inch long. Because, do you see how this makes a letter V right there? And if I flip it over, you can still see a little bit of a crack there. You see how this has a V cut here, but and I don't even see the crack. But if I turn it over, wow. So, letter V, what's going on? It also has a V right here. So I have a little drawing here. So let's say that you wanted to make a heart. You wanted to cut out a heart. So I'm not talking about the tip of the V. I'm talking about the interior. How about you want to make like a starfish or a star? It always wants to crack right at that V part. Maybe teeth on a dog or a dinosaur. Maybe you want to make a cloud or a daisy. It wants to crack right there. How about your house numbers? You want to make house numbers. You want to make the number 3. So on your sheet, I said draw a 3, a 5, a 4. What I'm talking about is this internal V. So here's how it goes. And this is what I would like you to draw on your paper. A V. And then at the tip of the V, just come down on both sides, and then just draw a little bottom. And then put a whole bunch of arrows going away on both of the sides, and draw a little crack. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when you have 90 degrees or less, at this part of the V, when it shrinks, it wants to go this way. And that part of the V wants to go that way. So they just rip. So instead, we want to make a U. We want to cut a U. Don't cut V's, cut U's. If you forget and you cut a V, one of my favorite tools is a chopstick that you put in the pencil sharpener. It's like a dull pencil, and you use that the pointy part, and you just spin it around. There's 2 ways you could do it. If it's too hard for you to cut a U because it's a real tight area, I say get a straw. My favorite is like a coffee stirrer, those little red coffee stirrers. Or if you go to acupuncture, so you know somebody who's an acupuncturist, you ask them to give you the guide tubes. They're these little short blue, real tough tubes. And you can poke that right into your clay before you've even cut a V. So you know where you want the tip of the V to be. You poke the straw in your clay, you yank it out. It cuts a whole circle out. Gone. Then you put your needle tool in there and you just go zoop, zoop. That's what the 2 arrows mean. So you got a big old slab here. You haven't even cut all of this away yet. You take your coffee stirrer, and you push down and actually cut all the way through the slab, maybe twirl it around a little bit, and then yank it out. And this is gonna have the clay will be stuck inside of this
Can you see that?
straw. And then you take your needle tool. All you have is a big slab with a hole in it, and then you decide where you're going to cut it, and then you just go like this and cut here, and you cut here, because that's your small U. So when you look at this, there's a whole bunch of U's in here, but they're so tight that they look like V's. So I'm going to turn it over to the back side. And the idea is where you have a real tight one, you would have done it like this. So where all these little tight ones are, you do this first. And then cut around it. This one does have one little V, and it does have looks like a little bit of a crack there, but where the V is. But it looks for the most part that they did this.
Okay.
Now, the other smart thing the person, whoever made this, did, can you see that it has a lot of grog in here? Can you see those little kind of light colored specks? That's either silica sand or it's clay that's been fired, high fired, and then pulverized and sorted by grit size and added to the clay when the clay was made. Or you as a student, you could just buy some grog and you could add it to your own clay. As long as it's cone 10 clay, it's okay. Grog. So because it's so groggy, the extra grog makes the clay not shrink so much, because cracking happens during shrinkage. So now we're going to talk about uneven pressure when you're handling greenware especially, but even bisqueware. And if you have a really big pot, I would say this rule goes for even high-fired cone 10. Can you see this crack right here? Probably somebody picked it up wrong. They picked it up like so, one hand and a thumb right on the rim. This puts extra pressure just at that one point. I did this once. I had thrown a 25-pound bowl. I picked it up wrong, and I actually could feel it. It's sort of like someone popping their knuckles, I suppose, or something. I could feel this little vibration right when I picked it up, and sure enough, when it came out of the bisque, it had a crack. Yeah, so I ruined my piece just because I picked it up wrong. And when you pick up your own things and wreck it, you feel pretty bad. When you pick up somebody else's piece with one hand and wreck it, you probably are going to feel worse, and you have to write them a sorry note, right? So just what we want to do is always use two hands and pick it up. So the proper way to pick it up is using two hands. So that means if you've got something of yours in your own hand, you need to put your piece down carefully, properly. Then two hands from underneath, pick up by the bottom and sneak your fingers underneath like so, lift it, and then when you want to put it down, move it. You gently put one little part of it down, and then gently put the rest of it down. So that's how you want to handle things. So never pick it up by the rim with one hand. Another way people will do things wrong is they will go like this, and they'll grab an item with one hand on the rim. And usually what happens is they are now holding that part of the rim in their hand, and the bowl is still sitting on the table because they just broke that whole section off. Also, if you pick it up by the handle, especially when it's greenware. Even bisque, I don't like to pick things up by the handles when they're bisqued. Okay, so just don't do it. Two hands from underneath. You could also use your hands like a vise and put them equally and lift it up like this, so that they're totally on the sides, they're not underneath it at all. But I'm using two hands.
Right, got it.
So yeah, so something that's tall, like something that's tall like this, maybe it has a big lip on it. Your hands could kind of come up to where the lip is, but again, like a vise. So I had a student who walked up to me and said, "Hey, why do you think this cracked?" And there's another way you can get this crack But usually when you get this next crack, you'll have two of them opposite. If you ever have two cracks going down the pot like this on opposite sides, right down the diameter, usually it's when you trimmed it. Let's pretend this is the wheel. It's sitting on the wheel head, and you put 4 trimming wads. Trimming wads are little pieces of clay that you attach to the pot to the wheel after you center it before you trim. And if you use 4 and your pot is a little bit past leather hard going to bone dry, and you push in, when you push the trim wads down, you kind of push them in at the same time. Well, it's not that it's when you're pushing these in you crack it, it's when you're pushing these two in, you're pushing so hard that you compress the rim too much, and it just relieves the tension by cracking there and there. So I always use either 1 trimming wad around the whole thing, so it's even pressure, or I like to use 3, just like a Mercedes-Benz, 120 degrees. 3 is an even pressure. And you hold the bowl, you put one of them down, you put a second one down, you put a third one down. Because when you're doing 2 at the same time, to keep it centered, that's when you usually crack the rim like that. So that's you can see the crack on this rim right here.
Got it.
And this ties into where the foot was placed. So when you put the foot in the wrong place, i.e. not supporting the walls, underneath the walls, all the stress goes to the rim. So you can induce cracking just by putting the foot in the wrong place. Okay, and this one shows the same thing. So this one, it could have been that someone picked it up wrong. But it also could have been that the foot was too far in. It wasn't supporting the walls. Okay, now last one. This is the last one for today. This is the last one on your sheet. It's number 8. This is showing a big crack here, here, and here. And it's a slab with a slab for a wall. So basically, the problem here, if you think of how you build a house, you start with the foundation. Where do you put the walls?
On top of the
Top of the foundation. So here's the foundation is the slab, and this person chose to put the walls around the edge, the outside edge of the foundation. No. You get more shrinkage here, less here, it just comes apart. So, plus it's going to be shorter. You'll put more food in it if you put the walls on top. So, number 8 on your sheet says, place walls on top of foundation slab, not around base edges. And I'd like you to make a little drawing of that. So here's a sample where the person did it correctly. This student took a slab, took a large coil, went from one corner of the table to the other corner of the table to roll it into a very long coil, rolled it out so it was another slab, pressed the doily in just the right thickness and on the outside, scored the edge of the top of the slab, scored the bottom part of the wall, drop of water, peanut butter slip. So the way we can get like a drop of water by using a round sponge. You get it wet, but you wring it out quite a bit, so there's just a little bit of water left. And let's say this was the inside. You hold it in the center. I love these round sponges. You hold it in the center, and you turn it into a wheel, and you just push it in there like that. See, after you scored it with a fork right here, right? I like to make diamonds. Then you just go like this and just roll it around. And if you have just the right amount of water in there, it gets into all those grooves. And you do it the same thing for the side wall, same. And then you make your slip. I'm not going to make a slip, but just pretend I got some clay in my hand. I dip it in the water. I flop it over. I rip it and stack it till it sticks to my hands. And then the little bit of heat then the little heat from my hands will cause the slip to release from my hands. That's when it's just right. I roll that into a worm, and I smear the worm into the score marks. Then I want to press the two together so this happens. So this person did it correctly. These are just pieces of felt so it won't scratch your table. But this person did it the right way. Okay, so that concludes what makes clay crack.